Welcome back to The Farming Lawyer. I'm attorney Craig Steger, practicing in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Today I want to talk about muddy roads, or maybe even worse, manure-covered roads. And I want to talk to farmers and those that work on farms about this issue because it's actually kind of an important issue. It's more than just an annoyance. It's more than just an embarrassment. It can actually be a significant liability issue for farmers. Just this week, or maybe last week, I was on my way to work and I passed a tractor and a large manure spreader, and actually I was behind one and there was one coming from the other direction, large farm near me, whatever. So they're out hauling manure, and the tractor, one of the tractors was pulling from a side road out onto the main road that I was driving on, and it's sort of, the road kind of slopes there. And as it went around, the manure spreader was pretty loaded, and a decent amount of it sloshed out the back corner of the truck, of the manure spreader, and ended up on the road. And right before I got to it, so of course I drove through it in my vehicle, which was annoying. But I understand that stuff happens. But it made me think, because I've been involved in cases, not necessarily with manure, but more so with mud. And mud is just one of those things that is difficult to control, especially in the spring and the fall. You know, you're out doing field work, planting, things like that in the spring, bringing tractors in, drive back out on the road, and the mud that's in the lugs on the tires kind of to flop out ends up on the road. Or maybe during the summer when you're chopping hay, you're bringing choppers in and out, wagons, semis, trailers, things like that in and out, and you can very quickly bring dirt and mud onto the road. And especially in the fall when you're trying to chop corn or combine corn and beans, you can sometimes be dealing with some wet conditions and mud ends up on the road. My experience has been that most farmers do a pretty good job of trying to limit that, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes it just, if you're going to get into get into your fields, going to get your crops, or you're going to spread manure, things like that, some of that dirt is going to come out with you. The mud's going to come out with you. And so I was just curious what the law says about that. Some of it kind of is what I expected, and some of it was sort of surprised me a little bit. So I want to treat mud and manure a little differently for a couple of reasons. So let's talk about mud first. So mud is kind of one of those things that can't really always be avoided. Yes, it'd be nice if you could always do your field work when the weather's good and the fields are dry, but the reality is that doesn't always happen. And depending on the type of equipment you're driving, you can bring dirt and mud out onto the roadway, and that can be dangerous. And for dirt, it's more of an annoyance probably than anything else for most people, but it can be dangerous for, let's say, motorcycles. I've been involved in cases where, motorcycles came along after, field work had been done, especially if it's raining at the time, or if it's dark, they may not see it on the road, and that can get real slippery really fast. So it's really, really important, if you can't avoid bringing dirt and mud onto the roadway, it's very important that you clean it up as soon as possible. I know some farmers they'll come along with a skid steer or loader tractor, something like that, and try and scrape the roads off, which of course in and of itself can be dangerous. So if you're doing that, you want to have lights and, slow moving vehicle signs and things like that. So be careful. Maybe you want to have a pickup truck with flashers on as someone just warning traffic. Where I live, it's windy roads, corners everywhere, and you may just not have a lot of warning. But sometimes if you do leave mud and dirt on the roads and you can't get it cleaned up right away, or you're still driving on it, you may want to put up some sort of warning, maybe a sign, whatever the case may be, to alert other people, especially motorcyclists, that there may be mud and dirt on the roads. And some states are going to require you to do that and can give you citations or tickets for not doing that. I have a Substack article that I really kind of go into more the nitty gritty of this and actually reference particular statutes and rules in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, where I practice. So if you'd like more specific details about any of this, just go over and check out my Substack account, The Farming Lawyer, and I'll have information in the description as well. I'll have a link to that Substack if you want. And if you could go over there and subscribe to my Substack, I'd greatly appreciate it. It doesn't cost you anything other than your email, and then you can be alert to new postings. I don't make a video about everything. And when I do, so sometimes I put articles on Substack that don't make videos, or when I do videos, usually there's a Substack article that's much more detailed on the topic and might answer some questions that maybe I didn't get to in the video. So check out my Substack if you haven't already done so. So that's kind of one thing, is recognize that you could be, number one, you could be cited. You could get a ticket if you don't do a good job of cleaning up the dirt or mud on the roadways, and if you don't do it quickly enough. You could also be legally liable, and you don't want other people to get hurt. So, if someone does get hurt because they crash or motorcycle loses control because of it, you don't want that to happen. And you can obviously be legally responsible for that. And then the other thing to keep in mind is, does your insurance cover that? It may depend on some different factors, the type of insurance you have. What's leaving the mud? Is it a tractor and wagon? Is it a semi-truck and trailer? Because different insurance policies may provide different types of coverage and have different types of exclusions. So it's a really, really good idea to talk about this. If you farm in such a way that it's likely that you may be doing a lot of road traffic, especially on state highways, blacktops, things like that, that's where you really have to be careful. Check with your insurance agent and find out what kind of coverage you have and if there's coverage that you can add for those kinds of situations, because the last thing that you want is to have something like this happen and find out for whatever reason that you don't have insurance protection, and then suddenly someone is looking at your farm to pay their damages. So that's kind of mud and dirt. What about manure? Now, manure can have all the same problems. It can be, first of all, it can be very annoying to people to drive through it, and it can be unsafe for people, motorcyclists especially, going through manure. Can be very, very dangerous to them. And manure may be treated differently under the law. And the other thing to keep in mind is manure shouldn't be on the road the way that mud is, because if manure ends up on the road, it means you overloaded, or you overloaded your manure spreader, or maybe you didn't close the gate properly or whatever, and you have less excuse for spilling manure on the roadway than you do dirt and mud. And some states have very specific provisions that say you must not leave manure on the roadway, and they can impose heavy fines and penalties similar to dirt and mud. But there may be very specific statutes that deal with manure that you want to pay attention to. And again, I have more detail on that, at least as it pertains to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa over on my Substack, so be sure to check that out if you get a chance. But here's another problem that you might have. In some states and in some insurance policies, there will be an exclusion for manure because it falls under the category of a pollutant. A lot of insurance policies, farm policies, are not going to provide coverage for pollution-related damages unless it's expressly covered under the insurance policy. Things such as, in the more common situation, let's say your pit you're spreading manure on the fields and you have runoff and it causes a fish kill or damage to the neighbor's property. There may be, because it's manure, there may be exclusions to insurance policies for that may also apply if you lose manure on the roadway. So you have to be very, very careful when it comes to manure. Things can and do happen, but as a general matter, you have control over that by simply not overfilling the manure. Or if you're hauling liquid, make sure you've got solids to keep it from flowing out, whatever you got to do. But you have to be very, very careful when it comes to spilling manure on the roadway, because you may have enhanced penalties, and you may also have additional reasons why your insurance company isn't going to cover that. So I really wanted to emphasize that. I understand having farmed, that sometimes things happen, and then when they do happen, do your best to clean it up and warn people if it happens. That's just the most important thing you do. Warn people and clean it up as quickly as possible. That may be enough to protect you, or at a bare minimum, it will probably give you greater protection, either from the authorities if they try to ticket you, or if you are sued or have a claim brought against you because someone is injured because of the spilled manure. It will hopefully protect you a little bit. And it's just the right thing to do, right? So pay attention to that. Train your employees on how to, minimize mud, dirt, manure, whatever that's getting on the things like loose hay, silage. That's something to think about too. If you're hauling corn silage and things like that, that stuff can blow out. I know it can happen. So Silage on the roadway is another hazard, especially to motorcyclists. May require you to, not fill them as much or have a rollover cover or something like that if it's windy or whatever, or if the corn, if the silage is really dry and it's blowing out. Don't just assume that it's okay that if it ends up on the roadway. Just be mindful of the fact that if someone gets hurt because of it, you may be legally liable and you may or may not have insurance coverage for that. So it's really, really important to know your insurance, to talk through these scenarios with your insurance agent. And I always encourage people, run these kinds of scenarios past your insurance agent and do it in writing. Send him an email, send him a text message, whatever, showing what your question is and what the answer is, so that if there ever is an issue later on, at least you can show you did your due diligence and this is what you were told by insurance agent. Don't just assume you're covered and then start looking at your insurance after the fact. You may be out of luck at that point in time. So something to keep in mind, both for the protection of the public as well as your protection and the protection of your farm and assets, because the last thing you want to do is to have someone hurt or killed or whatever because of this, and then you find out you don't have insurance or you don't have enough insurance, and suddenly your family farm's at risk. So these are things that you should really pay attention to, think through, have plans, train, whatever you got to do. Take reasonable steps and precautions to keep this from happening, and when it does happen, take reasonable steps to clean it up and warn people until you do get it cleaned up. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or strong feelings about that one way or another, feel free to go over to the Substack and leave a comment there, or do it here in the video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you have a case, if you've been injured or you're being sued because of this, don't leave a comment. Just call or email me. My contact information is always in the description. I'll be happy to talk to you. That way your question is confidential and you don't have to worry about waiving any attorney-client privilege. So send that stuff through either a phone call, text message, or email to me. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions or want more information, go over to the Substack. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, everyone, have a good one.